I get a chance to chat with luminaries in e-discovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI e-discovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in e-discovery. Thank you for tuning in. Good morning or good evening, depending upon where you are, and welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. Each week I host an episode, or sometimes two, as in this week, of eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest today is Darren, and I forgot, I should have asked the proper pronunciation of your last name. I know how mine gets mangled all the time. So it's Darren.
Well, in English, it's Cerasi. In Italian, it's Cerasi. So take your pick.
Which do you prefer?
I'm fine with either, as long as you don't say Cerasi. That's fine.
I know which my wife will prefer. The Italian, always. Always. Well, in any case, Darren is a partner with Deloitte out of Singapore, and he's so gracious as to join us at the early hour of 8 a.m. his time, 5:30 p.m., or whatever it is, 6 p.m. my time. And 8 a.m. your time, not whatever it is.
Whatever.
And I'd like to start the discussion today, Darren, if we could, with you telling us a bit about your background, how you got into all of this, and what you do today.
Right. So thanks very much for the kind invitation to the association. Apologies for the lighting. I'm actually in Malaysia for 3 days, so I'm making sure that the lighting is appropriate so you can actually see me, not just hear me.
Yeah, I don't know how many different countries you've been in as we've tried to arrange this, but it seems like quite a few.
Yeah, indeed. Yes. So next week, Philippines, the week after that, Thailand. So I tend to travel quite a bit. So I'm based in Singapore. I've been in Singapore the last 23 years. Education was in law for my sins. I kind of discovered technology. And I was looking for a technology agnostic career in technology. So I first found information security. Then while I was here, we responded as an organization. My organization then responded to, it was called the I Love You virus. And it came out of the Philippines, excuse me, and read up about the story. And I found out that the local police had to release the 3 individuals after interrogation because there was no law against it at the time. So, as a young man, I was struggling to kind of figure out my path in terms of career. And I said to myself, hang on, it's technology, it's kind of investigations, there's law. I know a guy who has got these 3 skill sets, me. So that's where I joined an investigations company that had classic fraud investigations, conflict of interest, bribery, corruption. But more and more of the evidence was appearing on computer devices. So I got into what was known then as computer forensics. So really focused on that space. A number of years later, maybe about 2004, the big project in Japan, 60 custodians. And we were engaging with the law firm, with the client. What's the nature of the investigation? And the attorney said, it's not investigation. I said, okay, what is it? It's e-discovery. I was like, what's that? I said, e-discovery? You're an attorney, right? I said, no, hang on. I read law for 5 years. That's it. And I said, it's the exchange of documents and, during litigation. I went, oh, disclosure. Because that's what I learned when I went to university in the UK and in Italy. And then, started engaging with them and understanding, what the actual use case was and what technology we used. And we thought, wow, that's really, really interesting. A couple of years later, I set up my own company, focused on digital forensics and later rediscovery. But, we were talking about the types of work that we do, George, if you remember, and a lot of what we do in Asia Pacific is actually investigations. And at a point in time, I think it was around 2007, I had a very large investigation and a significant amount of data. Pales into comparison to what we're dealing with today, but it was a lot back then. And I asked myself, could these e-discovery platforms be used for investigations? So I flew all the way to New York for legal tech in the middle of New York winter. It was freezing cold. And, just spent a few days there talking to folks. And yeah, I was the first person to bring an e-discovery platform to Singapore. The following year, Singapore was the first Asian country to issue rules of court in relation to the disclosure of electronic documents.
So do you ever have anyone come up to you and say to you, it's your fault they have to deal with this there?
No, it's my fault. Definitely not my fault. I just said, no, go and talk to the judge who actually wrote the rules of court. So it was really interesting because I was at a meeting and he attended it, and I shook his hand and said, congratulations, you've just created a cottage industry here in Singapore. So since then, just doing a lot of work around the region. And then, since the last 7 years, I joined Deloitte, based here in Singapore, and built up a team across Southeast Asia. So the team is spread across 6 geographies in Southeast Asia, and I have counterparts across the region in India, China, Hong Kong, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and we all work together. Many of us have known each other for at least 15 years, and that comes through when we discuss, with the clients, not just the experience that we have, the professionalism, but also the fact that we've worked together for so many years. So that's what many times that's what clients are looking for. Do you have the experience? Okay. Do you have experience in region? Right. So do you have experience working cross borders and together? Absolutely. Tick all those boxes.
Right. It's not just, do you know the technology? Do you know the local culture? Do you know what's appropriate and not appropriate?
Well, absolutely. So in dealing with people is one, but also each country tends to have their own ways of doing things from a technology perspective. Some countries have their own local applications that, messaging apps. So obviously you may have heard of WeChat in China, very popular. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Line in Japan, there's Zello in Vietnam. So how do you deal with all of these different apps is a challenge. How do you deal with all of the, not just the culture, but also the rules, the laws, rules, and regulations, because they're all different.
So I'll turn those questions back to you. How do you deal with all those things?
Well, you need to have people on the ground with the experience, with the expertise, who are in country, or at least have been in country. So like I said, I'm based here in Singapore, but I frequently do work around the region. You need to understand the laws, which is what we've done in Southeast Asia, at least, is we've set up our technology in cloud. During COVID, we were all affected by COVID. Sorry, pardon me. So as I like to joke, we didn't just binge watch Money Heist. We actually got busy with stuff. And the trend to cloud, everybody's been talking about it, but the actual, actually doing it is very different. And I find that COVID was an accelerator for that process. So we pushed a lot of our technology into cloud, serving most, if not all, of Southeast Asia. But there's one country, which is Vietnam, which has laws that are very similar to those in China, where the data needs to remain in country. So that's why we've made the decision to set up our technology in Vietnam to serve that market. And it's been proven a good choice, because a lot of clients have got operations there in Vietnam. Globally, you can see what's happening from a geopolitical perspective and how that's affecting economies. There's a decoupling of supply chains, or diversification away from China, and Vietnam is the beneficiary. So obviously, when you've got an uptick in international business, there's going to be an uptick of disputes, litigation, investigations. So we're on the ground with a team with technology. We're the only show in town.
For Vietnam, then, Do you have a data center there, or are you using cloud services that are restricted to Vietnam?
We have our own data center. To my knowledge, there's no cloud in Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
So that's not even an
option.
Not even an option. No.
Yeah, you could not do an Azure or an AWS instance that was just Vietnam.
That's correct. Yes, I mean, they may get there eventually, but in the landscape here, I mean, the big players are here in Singapore. I know AWS have opened up in Thailand and in Indonesia, and then they've got their whole of edge platform. But for us, they need to own it, and they've got some different ways of operating where they say, "Oh, we can do it," but from a risk management perspective, we weren't so comfortable with that option. So we said, let's set up in our own premises, which is what we've done.
So Vietnam is one example. There must be other examples where the practices and the laws conflict from one country to the next. I assume, first of all, are there such examples?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the main case obviously is China, where you have a clear conflict of law, and it's not just in terms of one law versus another. It's more in terms of legal systems. So the system that you're used to in the United States, which is common law, isn't the only legal system. So, for example, they use civil law, which emanates from France, like in Germany, they use civil law. In China, there's no concept of legal privilege. So that one just completely surprises individuals who aren't used to working in China.
I guess the upside is no need to prepare a privilege log.
I suppose so.
But if we're trying to find a silver lining here. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, I mean, in China, they've got the State Secrets Act, Cybersecurity Act. There's a panoply of legislation that we need to comply with, which we do, obviously, because we operate in China. But it does make things challenging. Also, in terms of you can, for example, go through an entire process to determine which documents can be exported out of China, but you need to engage local counsel, and there's a whole process. So many times that's only done as a last resort. Usually what happens is it starts off with the collections in country, the whole process is in country, the review is done onshore completely.
So everything stays in country.
Everything stays in country until you get to that kind of, we typically in a document review scenario do level 1, level 2, level 3. Typically there's a level 4 when it comes to China, mainly because you have to go through that process in terms of this document must stay, this one can go.
So China is the obvious, I don't know, given its size, I don't think we can call it an outlier, but the obvious exception. Are there other exceptions that you need to deal with? So China, you talked about. Vietnam, you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So depending on the industry that the ultimate client is in. So if you're in banking, many of the countries have got banking secrecy legislation, where the data, even many times the metadata, can't be viewed outside. Everything needs to be done onshore. South Korea is one country. I have in Singapore, where I reside, it's got a Banking Secrecy Act. And what was interesting to me is that years ago, in relation to LIBOR, if you remember LIBOR, George, and we were engaged by a British law firm to represent a British bank that had set up in Singapore, went through this entire process to identify, collect, process, host all the data in the law firm's premises. That's what they wanted, to only find out that actually the documents were already in the UK.
Oh, well.
After all that trouble.
I guess these things happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, many times, the focus, I think, these days in terms of cross-border data transfer, it's in relation to data privacy, so PII and so on. But let's not forget state secrets out of China, out of Vietnam. There's also the banking secrecy regulations. I mean, take a European example. Look at Switzerland, right? It's famous for its banking secrecy laws. Yep. In terms of Data privacy. There's a law that's about to be gazetted in Indonesia. We have a law here in Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines. We know India is enacting a law in terms of data privacy, data protection, and data localization. So in some circumstances, you may not be able to export those data, or if you do, you may have to redact those data in order to protect the confidentiality and privacy of the individuals.
A lot to deal with.
Indeed. That's why we've got a big team in country. Yeah.
That's right. Unlike the United States, where litigation tends to dominate the discussions about e-discovery, or as it would be called in the UK, e-disclosure, I gather where you are, investigations are the much larger volume of work performed, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the litigation portfolio is there, and arbitration is certainly a big trend across Asia, specifically in Singapore. The Singapore International Arbitration Center, very, very busy. Now, the rules of discovery, of disclosure are quite different in arbitration vis-a-vis litigation. Depending on the case, we have certainly supported clients in high stakes, high volume litigation. However, the uptick hasn't been as extensive as we had anticipated. Is one. So really focused on Singapore. Hong Kong also has e-discovery rules, but they're very specific to the commercial court, if I'm not wrong. And there's a number of very specific circumstances and tests that are applied as to whether e-discovery will even be used. Where we see litigation in Asia, it's actually Asian clients facing litigation in the UK or facing litigation in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done a number of cases there where we've worked with our clients, so it's a direct client. We work with our colleagues in the United States, or we've received instructions from a US counsel. They may be based in the West Coast, or they could be based in DC, for example, depending on the nature of the matter. They may or may not have a presence here in Asia, but the client is here, and they're facing litigation or regulatory scrutiny in the United States. So that's where our experience dealing with that helps enormously, because many times the clients just don't understand it. What's the legal hold? Do I really need to do this? Is a common question we get asked. But you're absolutely right.
So in those cases, in those situations, before we move on to investigations,
Mm-hmm.
It sounds from what you're saying as if an important part of what you bring to the table is the ability to educate both sides, the folks in whichever Asian country you're dealing with, on the one hand, and then the folks in the UK, United States, or wherever else it might be on the other hand, about each of them, what they should be expecting.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
New to them.
Yes, I mean, even sometimes we deal with clients where they say, they may have an internal capability. I said, oh, we'll just do remote collections. I said, okay, first of all, you may have the technology, but have you deployed it in that country is one. Oh, no, we haven't. So that can take a few months. Or you have these remote collection technologies that can be deployed at a moment's notice. But just because you have the technology, are you permitted to use it? Are you permitted to transfer the data outside?
Right.
So those type of questions with various internal stakeholders. So we're dealing with technology folks. They may have an internal discovery team. We're dealing with general counsel or head of legal compliance, plus external counsel. And many times, and I've had these conversations as well. In the UK, in the US, where they talk about the Far East, or that's a very UK term, or in the US talk about, well, it's Asia. Well, it's over 2 billion people,
right?
And it's just got such a spectrum of countries, from countries going through. I mean, we did a collection in a country where there's a civil war going on. We do work in countries where there's numerous military coups. All the way to some that are, semi-authoritarian to authoritarian to non-authoritarian. So dealing with all those issues is a real challenge. And, we do have to spend time explaining that to folks who maybe haven't come out here. Well,
Right.
maybe they have come here for a holiday in Thailand, spent a week on a
But that
beach.
can be a bit different.
Very different experience of working here and dealing with these type of matters that we're discussing today.
Right. And when you have, like, I lived in West Africa, and when you get up in the morning, turn on the radio, and the only thing playing is martial music, you know things have changed overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me a bit about what you do. I know we only have a few minutes left, because I know I have to get you out of here in about 5 minutes so you can get to the next thing. But tell me in our last 5 minutes here, some of what you're doing on the investigative side.
Right. Well, a lot of what we do on the investigation side is there's fraud cases from the very straightforward or banal time and expense, travel fraud, expense fraud, etc. Right. So we do a lot of work for our clients in the life sciences space. A lot of these multinationals, either in consumer or in banking, they've got a large footprint across Asia Pacific. So in order to support them, we've built out some workflows, and we take a very Asia Pacific lens, as opposed to country by country. Therefore, what they get is scale. They also get consistency of delivery and service. So wherever the matter is, it looks the same for them. But also we deal with, the more serious, the more high stakes type of internal investigations. So we deal with the technology, and many times we bring in our forensic accountants, our data analytics team, who have to go through all those transactions. So bribery and corruption is still a big issue. During COVID, we assisted a client with a 180 custodian FCP investigation across 4 locations in Vietnam, one of which was shut down by the government while we were about to go in and perform the collection. The latest trend, what we're seeing here, George, which I think is important to be aware of, is sanctions. So I spoke about the geopolitical winds that certainly had an effect on the economy. And then you look at the various sanction regimes that are in place from the US, for example, as well as other countries. And that's creating a huge risk for our clients. And so we're helping them with those type of matters where they may be Asia based, but they need to respond to the regulation of the United States. So they engage us, they engage US counsel that are based in Asia, so they understand Asia, to guide them through that process, to make sure that it's full and frank disclosure. And obviously we hope to get a positive outcome for our clients.
Oh, so it sounds as if you really, for those investigations, you need to bring to bear all of the skills and expertise you've got in the organization. And
yes, absolutely. So it's not just a case of let's just collect some data, process it, and do a linear review. We leverage analytics throughout our entire process. We leverage machine learning because many times, you need to find that needle in a haystack, and running a bunch of keywords based on the allegation or based on your past experience just doesn't yield the result that you expect. We've had clients where we've gone in and we've presented, look, we understand the situation. They've asked us to come in. I've said, look, halfway through the presentation, I go, that's really nice, but can you show me? Do you have the ability to find evidence related to my case that doesn't contain my keyword? But absolutely. So that's where we leverage more modern technologies such as ML, AI, not just in terms of our communication data set, office productivity documents, but also across the transactions. It's necessary to do that because the volume, the variety, and the velocity of data is just forever growing. That's not new. But
you're in the world of big data at that point.
Yes, and big data isn't just a lot of emails, George, as you know.
No, definitely not. If it were just a lot of emails, it would just be a lot of emails. It wouldn't be
exactly.
Data. Okay, well, Darren, I know you need to run. Thank you so very much for joining us today. Darren is a partner with Deloitte based in Singapore. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Darren, thank you so very much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure, George. Talk to you soon.
Likewise.